Okay, where are you?
I'm over here, eh?
No.
Okay, like here we are at Peter's Donuts.
Oh, take off. We are
It's
not.
And welcome to Gridiron America from Japan. This is Greg James, your host, and I am here with episode number 3. Got Don Charbon and Heath Graham from the Third Down Gamble podcast, and today we are talking Canadian football, which, if you know me, that's my favorite. Of all the football leagues, that is my favorite league because you can find me obviously at CFL America on Twitter. Um, so welcome, gentlemen. I appreciate you. It is it's Friday evening there over in Saskatchewan. It's Saturday morning here in Japan. So how cold is that's my first question is how cold is it there?
We're sitting Celsius about minus 20, which quick calculation is probably high single digits Fahrenheit, I would guess.
I just got cold just hearing the minus part, and then throw a 20 in front of it. I'm like, oh, it's going to be 50. It's going to be about 50 some degrees here. And after we wrap up with the podcast, I'm going to be heading into a mall downtown Okayama and playing Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, I imagine hopefully the weather's going to warm up sooner rather than later. And Don, you're down there, and I know you're not. Well, you guys are both. You guys are in Saskatchewan. Um, you're not that. I mean, you guys are out in the sticks. So how windy does it get this time of year?
In terms of wind, it's not that significant. Yes, we are the open prairie, but it's not usually that much to handle.
Right.
It's more the abject cold at times. And we just went through a warm spell and now it's dropping to minus 30 tonight. That's what is hard to get used to, especially when we're this late in the winter in
Yeah.
February.
Yeah. So, well, guys, a lot has been happening with the off season. We just finished up, excuse me, CFL free agency. And where are we at with the league right now? If you can kind of for everybody who's listening, and even myself, because I've been kind of out of the CFL loop with my move over to Japan and following following X League stuff and our XFL X League stuff. So some items in the news that I have missed. So where are we at? How did CFL free agency go this year? What were some of the big moves?
For the most part, I would say that free agency fell as what we thought it would. The biggest change is probably Trevor Harris, who was the quarterback of the Montreal Alouettes, is now in Saskatchewan. And Cody Fajardo, the quarterback here, has moved to Montreal. Toronto more or less stayed pat. They picked up a couple of defenders from the Stampeders. Stampeders did what they always do, not much. The big changeover was in Hamilton. They've got the Grey Cup game there this fall. Tiger Cats are making a push to be in that game again, and so they turned over a lot of their roster.
And Bo Levi Mitchell obviously is the big name going to Hamilton. And also too with Toronto, McLeod Bethel Thompson didn't re-sign, and now he's coming south to the USFL. To me, that was like the biggest shock. So of all the CFL news that I've seen, aside from the Alouettes going back to the league, to me, that was kind of the biggest shock. I mean, and what I've read has been very positive spin, but and that's been in the U.S. press down here in terms of, well, this is great for the USFL, so on and so forth. But how are CFL fans taking that news and what's being set up there?
Well, for starters, it appears that it's Chad Kelly time with the Toronto Argonauts. He was the quarterback of note in the Grey Cup that came in for the injured McLeod Bethel Thompson and led the comeback win over the Blue Bombers. The Argonauts themselves seem to be fully supportive of Chad Kelly as the number one guy going into camp. There was a lot of speculation that they were going to push hard to get Dane Evans in a trade from the Argonauts. Didn't happen. He's now gone to BC. As far as McLeod Bethel Thompson, he's a 34-year-old quarterback. He's been a decent quarterback in the CFL, never the outstanding quarterback in the league. And there was a lot of speculation after the Grey Cup that he was thinking retirement. He was looking at some options south of the border. It didn't really come as a huge surprise, I don't think, to anyone. And if we're losing a 34-year-old, somewhat successful quarterback to the USFL, it's not a huge hit to the league at this point. If a mass exodus continues, it'll start to raise some eyebrows. But at this point, I don't think there's too much fear of losing out to the USFL or the XFL.
Okay. And
the big thing with Bethel Thompson was that, of course, his wife has a contract with Marvel to write for them with their Avengers. That was drawing him back there. And of course, being in Canada, he was away from the family for quite a few months of the year. There wasn't much else that he had to prove in Canada. The Argonauts were winning the Grey Cup last year with him at the helm. Granted, he broke his thumb in the game, and that precipitated a change at quarterback for the fourth quarter. McLeod Bethel Thompson did it very classily. He left with a great note saying thank you for everything. The Argonauts themselves are quite content with what happened. They were hoping that he would come back, but they do have Chad Kelly, Ben Holmes under contract. They may look at another quarterback to bring into camp. They seem to be okay with it.
Okay. And then obviously the other big loss at quarterback for the CFL was my personal favorite and the guy who was my number one pick in my CFL fantasy draft last year, Nathan Rourke. And he's headed to Jacksonville. Hopefully he's going to sign up, make it as a backup for the Jacksonville Jaguars. What was the reaction of that? Because to me, that was one of those news items where over here in Japan, I got, it popped right up and I'm like, oh. So, and again, I was thinking very selfishly because he was in my keeper league.
The news was not a surprise. He
Really?
auditioned for quite a few NFL teams. The reason that he took Jacksonville, from what I can gather, is that there are ex-CFL quarterbacks there that are in the coaching staff. So he felt he had a better opportunity to grow, gain an opportunity. He did light up the league last year. It was phenomenal what he did. People can say that they saw it coming, but no one saw this coming. And full credit to him. He put in the effort, the time. He was very, very strong-willed, developing his passing so that he could become more accurate. He deserves everything that he can find south of the border. Whether he stays or not is another question.
Well, and he left on good terms too, it sounds like.
He did. It's an interesting situation for CFL fans and the league where you've got a Canadian-born quarterback who played U.S. ball. He did come up here and light up the league. And from a marketability standpoint, it's tough to lose someone like him. He was young and successful, and he was going to be the face of the CFL had he remained. At the same time, most CFL fans tend to understand the reason why he decided to look south of the border for opportunities. Financially, it's a huge difference.
Right.
And I think all of us are rooting for him to succeed. We would love for him to come back, lead the BC Lions to glory and light up this league and change the record books for Canadian quarterbacks and quarterbacks in general. But at the same time, we're all rooting and we want to see what he can do if he gets the chance to get some meaningful snaps in the NFL.
Yeah. And you mentioned it. I mean, let's just say he does get in, he does light it up in the NFL. Well, during every broadcast, every other word is going to be CFL. So, I mean, the exposure even for the league, even though he's not in the CFL, but by him being in the NFL, having played in the CFL, it's only good. That's just, it's a net positive for the CFL.
Cameron Wake, if you think back a few years ago, he when the television would have those little bumpers and they'd say, "My name is," and whatever, just as the first snaps were being held. And Cameron Wake would always say British Columbia Lions.
Yeah.
So there is that connection to the CFL. The thing for Nathan Rourke ultimately is that his window is tight in terms of his opportunity. I've been hearing a lot lately that 28 seems to be the number where if you're still not in the NFL, you're probably not going to be in the NFL. So you want to make your mark before that age. He's young. He's got that going for him. The Lisfranc injury should not be a problem for him to be mobile. Hopefully it works out well. But you're right. It does make the CFL, in terms of its marketing that way, a little bit better, because yes, there are quality athletes up here that rightfully could play NFL football.
Right. And that perception has changed a lot fairly recently. Boomer Esiason aside, I think most NFL
don't get me going about Boomer's take on the CFL.
Most commentators are aware of the quality of play. Years ago, when Doug Flutie had his success up here and then went to the Buffalo Bills, listening to NFL broadcasts, it was like he had vanished for 7 years.
Yeah.
They talked about his time throwing his Hail Mary pass for Boston College. They talked about his time in the USFL, his early stint in the NFL. And then there's this gap in his resume. You're not getting that anymore. You're getting, they're talking about that CFL franchise and the couple of years a guy cuts his teeth up here before heading south of the border. And that's great for the league and the visibility.
Yeah. And two, I mean, we live in a day and age now where everything's streamed, everything's on. I mean, everything is accessible. So you don't fall down that information black hole where to go, because it's all right there. I mean, all of us can access it in the palm of our hands.
YouTube is available to just about everybody on the planet. And if you Google CFL on YouTube, you'll find all kinds of videos, not only promoting players, promoting the league itself, but just going back and looking at old games, looking at Nathan Rourke when he was tearing the league apart. It's all there. So the information highway is just expanding, and the CFL is catching on to that highway, albeit a little bit slow, but it is happening.
Yeah. Well, you know what? And now that you mention it, so kind of take a turn. Let's talk about, I kind of want to, if we can, kind of just maybe just briefly go to each town and team and where are they at, kind of on the up, on the down. So let's start out west. So talking about the BC Lions, had a new owner come in, definitely has put some effort into it. Where are the BC Lions now? They seem to be tracking up, even with the loss of Nathan Rourke.
BC Lions have Vernon Adams Jr. as their quarterback. Now they've brought in Dane Evans. If people remember a few years ago when Dane Evans showed up in Hamilton, he took the job of Vernon Adams Jr. So Vernon Adams may be wondering about this, but the Lions, I think, are in great shape. They've got a great receiving core, a strong offensive line. Their defense is stout. They should be fine. Omar Daman has been fantastic as an owner. He has revitalized fan interest. Went to a game there last year, and it was unbelievable, the energy around the stadium. He really has worked hard to reconnect that team to its base, and already the dividends are starting to show.
And attendance has improved
massively.
Going on to Edmonton. Where is Edmonton? Edmonton is, Heath.
So Edmonton, this is now year 2 of the Chris Jones era coming up. Famously, he had success in Edmonton previously, went to Saskatchewan, left there, had a little drink of water in the NFL, has now come back. What he is known for is blowing things up his first year and finding diamonds in the rough. We're going to see what's going to happen this year, because he had a ton of player turnover in his first season. He was bringing guys into camp throughout the season, competing for jobs. They've got a really solid receiving core. Taylor Cornelius is the quarterback going into the season. They've got Trey Ford, another Canadian quarterback, as their second string guy. Cornelius is a very interesting watch. He's tall, lanky, speedy. He's played for some of I believe he was with the the Vipers in the XFL previously, before coming back up here. Chris Jones is known for his defense, and he doesn't have the star quarterback of the league, but he's got a lot of tools in place. This is make or break. Their biggest problem is they haven't won a home game in 2 years.
Yeah.
Victor Cui has taken over as president of the organization, and they are trying to re-engage with fans as well. You can get season tickets for a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 kids for $300 right now.
Nice.
Which is going to be huge to bring that fan base back.
Oh, well, they're going to bring back the cheap beer night, because that, if you guys remember several years ago when they did that, they had like 40,000 in the stadium. Now, granted, 20,000 were in the beer garden, but still, there were a lot of people. So, I mean, and I follow Victor on, we all follow Victor probably on social media. So he does engage with the fans. I know he's been on the Turf District, talked to those guys. Has he been with you guys yet?
Yes.
When? How long ago was that show?
It was about almost a year ago.
Okay.
Just when he had started in the position and he was sort of getting his feet wet, as it were. Chris Jones was hired. He was coming into that situation, and he was really kind of looking for the challenge. This is a guy that knows business. He's built empires from the ground up. He's very familiar with hard work, and he's not afraid of it.
And do you see him and the and it's early morning, and the owner out in BC, do you see this as kind of the new breed of owners coming in, of people in charge that are going to be able to take this league to where we want it to be?
Very much so. One thing that Amar has done in BC for their season opener last year, they had a rock concert prior to the game. So you had people showing up for the concert and sticking around for football. And that was a reason to get them in the stadium, and it worked. And both him and Victor Cui have done a great job of being very transparent too. They've come in and not tried to sugarcoat anything. One of the things Victor Cui is really passionate about is getting that home win, and they've got a guaranteed win night on week 1. If they don't win, you can continue to get free tickets until they get a home win.
Oh, wow.
Another great marketing campaign.
Yeah,
so they're really thinking outside the box and saying, how do we engage that next generation, get people in here first, and then worry about what the tickets cost later. And that's the way to do it.
Yeah. And moving south to Calgary, what's it looking like in Calgary right now this coming season, not only on the field but also with the ownership and new stadium? I mean, I know you hear a lot on just obviously the Stampeders have been playing the same ballpark for forever. So what's going on over there?
The ownership group is strong. They also own the Calgary Flames. They're deep pocketed. There's no issues there. They are trying to work out a deal, and it seems to go back and forth between retrofitting the stadium and moving the franchise closer to downtown. McMahon Stadium is in a fantastic spot right now. There's a major highway that accesses it. You can get there with the C train, as they call it in Calgary, quite easily. So it's very easy to access. The problem for the stadium is that the underground, the walkways, the concourses are just so old, and they just need a massive refresh. And in Calgary too, the nights get cold. That's right. Elevation. It might be an idea to maybe roof part of the stadium, keep some of the heat in. I don't know. But there's a lot of discussion because the Calgary Flames, the NHL team, are also looking for a new home. And the two are tied together quite closely. Gotcha. So we'll see what comes of that. In terms of the team itself, John Hufnagel is now moved up to president. The head coach, Dave Dickinson, is now general manager. They tend to be very quiet on free agent Tuesday. They were again this year. Julian Hauser from the Tiger Cats, the defensive line, was probably their biggest signing, maybe Micah Awe, linebacker. But it's a situation where they have to find a way to live without Bo Levi Mitchell.
Right. Jake
Mayer is now the quarterback of note. He guided them for most of last season. It's his team to to operate, and they've got tons of weapons. Their receiving core is probably going to be upgraded with talent that they have already signed, not through free agency. Their offensive line is strong. The Stampeders will be good. There is little doubt of that.
Right. And they're always, I mean, let's face it. They've always competed for that division. As long as I can remember. It's weird now though to see Bo Levi Mitchell not on the team though. For me, that's going to take some getting used to. And moving on to your neck of the woods, your Rough Riders.
Well, Saskatchewan is in trouble. They did bring in Trevor Harris to probably steady the quarterbacking issues that they were facing last year. This team gave up the most sacks of any team in the CFL by a wide margin last year, over 75. The upgrades that they made, of course, offensive line, but they did get beat up with the receiving core. They did make some minor free agent signings that helped them out. Juwan Breskison, Jake Weineke were the two of note, but they don't have that deep threat, that guy that's going to, tear the lid off the defense. The other side of the equation, everything seems to be pretty much okay, except the defensive line. I think there are a couple holes up there that they have to address. The big question in Saskatchewan, of course, is you've got the head coach, Craig Dickinson, and the general manager, Jeremy O'Day, both on expiring contracts. It's not exactly a huge marketing tool to bring players in when you don't know who your boss is going to be the following year.
Right. And Heath, let's move it over to your favorite team, the Blue Bombers. First of all, what happened? I mean, in Japan. So the day of the Grey Cup, here, just the way the timing worked out, I had to check out at the third quarter to deal with City Hall paperwork here. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, Blue Bombers got this. And then I turn around and I'm like, what the heck? So where are we at with the Blue Bombers coming in? Coming into the season, we don't even need to revisit what happened with that fourth quarter. But we're if you want, unless you want to.
All that I'll say about the Grey Cup is, after a 29-year drought, had they not won the previous two, I would have been a lot more upset with the result.
Right.
Toronto beat them. I thought Janarian Grant ran that punt back. I thought, here we go. This is going to wrap things up. And all props to Chad Kelly and the Argonauts. They came down and beat them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and poke holes in anything. It was a great game.
Yeah.
Don and I were both in attendance. It was cold and it was a fun atmosphere and a really good time. The Bombers this year, they have basically re-upped and moving on. I think Coach Mike O'Shea has done a phenomenal job of building a culture in Winnipeg that players want to be a part of. We can't really talk much about free agency because so many of the key players re-upped before free agency opened. The biggest re-signing or new signing, I guess, would be Kenny Lawler coming back to Winnipeg after spending a year with the Edmonton Elks. They're essentially losing Greg Ellingston, who was only in Winnipeg for 1 year, and picking up the leading receiver from 2021 to complement the leading receiver from 2022 in Dalton Schoen. And one of the big surprises was they managed to find some money to get Rashid Bailey back. We thought he was going to be a loss in free agency. He sees what the potential is in Bomberland and says, I want to be a part of it. I'm going to take a little bit less money. So that receiving core, with Kenny Lawler being kind of that deep threat, is very stacked. Nick Dembski is one of the top Canadian receivers in the league. Drew Wolotarski is a sure hands guy to go along with Schoen and Lawler. Zach Collaros re-upped for 3 years. Adam Bighill on defense re-signed a long contract. Those two guys on the ends of the defensive line, Jefferson and Jeff Coate. The only question marks are defensive secondary and Father Time. They're a year older. A lot of these key veterans are now well into their 30s. Stanley Bryant won another outstanding lineman award, but he's in his late 30s now. How much does he have left? And right now, I would still say they're the team to beat in the league, but Father Time is undefeated.
Right. Well, with all that said, I mean, to me, I'm not. Somebody asked, forget who asked me the other day. Well, who are you going to pick for this year? I go, the Bombers. I mean, for all the reasons you just said, they're still the team. I would, odds-on favorite to not only go to the Grey Cup but win the Grey Cup.
And if they play Hamilton, Toronto has a 7 Grey Cup win streak now. I believe they haven't lost in 7 appearances. Winnipeg beats Hamilton in the Grey Cup, so that's the trade-off. There is we lost to Toronto last year, but we've beat Hamilton
right
7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 times that we played in the Grey Cup. It's a ridiculous stat.
Well, speaking of which, moving on to Hamilton, a lot of changes there, specifically at the QB position. Which one of you guys you get? Don?
Bo Levi Mitchell was a huge get. They got him through trade. They had to renegotiate to get him under contract for this year. They got him for 3. He's huge. He's a winner. He will motivate anyone around him to go along for the ride. He is fantastic, I think, for the Tiger Cats. The get of Tim White through getting a contract extension was big because he needs someone to throw the ball to. The Tiger Cats, where I'm wondering is they've given up on a couple of pieces in this defensive secondary to sign Bo because of the salary cap crunch that they were under. This is what could be their undoing a little bit. But Orlando Steinauer and Washington, his defensive coordinator, one of the things they've been able to do is pull talent and make them work together on that defense. And if they want to be in the Grey Cup, they're going to have to do that. The offense will take care of itself. Mitchell will easily put up 20 to 25 points a game without even blinking.
And do you see them? You seen them back in the playoffs this year?
I think Hamilton is a legitimate.
I take that back. Let me rephrase that. You see them winning the division.
That is going to be tough because there's a double blue team in the way.
Yeah. Which is the next team up. Heath?
Well, I'm just going to chime in quickly on Hamilton as well. And one of the things that we have seen in the CFL is going out and making big splashes in free agency can take a year to kind of see it to fruition. And we see that with, as we mentioned, the Edmonton Elks. We'll get to the Red Blacks as well. They were kind of the big free agent spenders last season. It's hard to get, you can sign an all-star roster, but they've got to work together. But moving on to the Argonauts, as we mentioned, the biggest loss is McLeod Bethel Thompson is gone. It looks like it's Chad Kelly time. There's a couple of other key players that were big splashes last year that are gone. Brandon Banks and Jagarrett Davis. They have brought Andrew Harris back for a swan song. He has announced that this will be his last season. He would like to he's now won 3 straight Grey Cups, 2 with Winnipeg, 1 with Toronto.
Right.
He wants another crack at it here as well. It looks on paper, at least, that it's going to be a Toronto Hamilton race for the top of the East Division. Repeating as
it always is. Yeah.
Repeating as champions is never easy either. It's a tall task. We know Hamilton's going to be motivated with the Grey Cup in their own backyard, but nothing motivates Toronto like spoiling a Hamilton party.
Yeah. And then moving on up north to Ottawa, where you think the Red Blacks, I mean, they were looking good towards the end of last season starting, but they're still a hot mess. It's just from my take on everything. Heath?
Yeah, I can take that one. Sorry, just 1 second.
No worries.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for Ottawa, I had picked them to be in the playoffs last year and was way wrong. But a big part of that was starting quarterback Jeremiah Mazzoli got hurt fairly early in the season, a devastating knee injury that took him out for the duration. Mm-hmm. He has re-signed for an additional 2 years. They had a coaching change in there as well. They seem to be really happy with the moves they made 2 years ago in free agency, and this is the time for them to make pay dirt. Devontae Dedmon is a explosive kick returner. He's going to be back. He came partway through last season after a little taste of the NFL. So special teams is one of their strong points. Jeremiah Mazzoli, as I said, has led teams successfully in the past. He's going to be a big part of seeing them into the playoffs. I think they're going to be much improved from where they were last year. That second, third, and fourth in the East could be really tightly contested. It could come down to the last couple of games for the playoff spots.
Yeah. And plus, they do have the Fred Biletnikoff of the CFL on that team. Western Illinois alum Jalen Ackland.
And he had a breakout season last year. We saw flashes in his first couple seasons in the league, and he was one of the best receivers last year. Another one of those guys with great hands. He's not necessarily going to blow you away with speed, but if you get it in his direction, he's coming down with it.
Yeah, and as somebody who went to Western Illinois, that's the one thing. Hey, Western. Anytime I hear, but when I first saw him play and I heard him, like, oh wow. But the thing is, you get a lot of great. He's emblematic of the talent that you find at the small schools, the schools that nobody's ever heard of. And just to me, it's I know at Western Illinois, an alumni newsletter, it seems like they're always mentioning him somewhere in that alumni newsletter. Very proud of him. And I think he's got a long career ahead of him. But like you said, he had a great season. Hopefully this year it gets him to the playoffs. And
go sorry
ahead.
to interrupt.
No,
One of the discussion points that has been going on is with the advent of the two spring leagues, the USFL and the XFL,
right.
The talent pool, is it going to be pulled away? And one of the things that Chris Jones said to TSN was that it's time for the CFL to look at smaller schools because there's a lot of talent out there. We just have to work harder to find it.
Right.
And I think he's quite right in that you can find a lot of quality people and a lot of quality players. They don't have to come from, the college bowl circuit.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it's, that way back when the American Football League was looking at the historically black colleges in the States. And you look at the talent, the Hall of Fame talent that came out of it, there's a lot of talent. And, we'll get into this after we talk about the Alouettes. But, yeah, there's a lot of football talent out there yet to be discovered. So, okay, so moving on to number 9 here, and I guess we're going to save the Alouettes. And that's, again, when I mentioned about the Red Blacks kind of being a hot mess, well, we got a hot mess with ownership now with the Alouettes. And but has that apparently has not affected the free agency signings or anything? It sounds to me like just on the face of it, the GM, coaches are taking care of their business, and the ownership is now with the league. So where are we at with everything?
You're right. The league has now taken control of the Alouettes. It did impact free agency though, because Eugene Lewis, Trevor Harris both kind of walked without knowing what was happening with the franchise.
Okay.
The CFL essentially took over on the 14th of February, and that was pretty much free agent day. Okay. Now in the CFL, you've got a week-long window to negotiate. And if the Alouettes weren't able to do much at that time because there was limbo, then that did impact them. Having said that, though, they did come out of free agency well enough with the signings that they did make. And they didn't lose much in terms of defense and offensive line. The league, by taking control of the situation, they've reinstated the club president. They will be sold at some point, sooner probably than later. Park Lane investment bankers are the people that are vetting the prospective owners. That group has had a long tradition and a strong tradition of working with major leagues such as the NHL. They've worked with teams in the NFL such as the Bengals. So they know what they're doing when it comes to this. The league has sort of, I think, in their mind, set a launch point of preferably before training camp, but if not, sometime in the early part of the season. The Alouettes, we're at this before. The league owned them through 2019. or 2020. No,
Mhm.
2019. Sorry.
Yeah.
And they got sold to Sid Spiegel and Gary Stern. And unfortunately for Sid Spiegel, he passed away prior to ever seeing the team play. And that was a very unfortunate circumstance. Gary Stern wasn't certain that he wanted to increase his 25% share. That put some wheels in motion. The CFL this time was very proactive. The Alouettes will be okay. It's just going to take a little bit of
Right.
time. They want to get the right people. You want to look at
Yeah.
British Columbia, for instance, and say, we need people like that.
Right. And Montreal, I mean, Montreal is a great market. Being in, my and that kind of leads me into the next part of this discussion about the league itself and the business of the league and so just kind of follow me along here. So we'll start with Montreal. So when I was in Montreal in November, it was the first week of the Grey Cup playoffs. And I went every little souvenir shop in the old city section and even where we were staying. Man, Montreal Canadiens, Montreal Expos. I only found one Montreal Alouettes hat, and it was my favorite type. What Heath kind of is wearing, the relaxed fit, and I could only find one. Is the league? Do you think the league's going to step up the marketing here to engage? Because we kind of talked earlier about engagement of fans, and there's a whole group of fans that the CFL needs to attract. That being younger I mean, we're older, so I mean, we're locked in. We've got our CFL stuff, but to bring in newer fans what's the league doing currently? Don or Heath?
Mario Cicchini, who is the president of the Alouettes, he's been very proactive in trying to entice new markets to the Als. The Toronto Argonauts have been really marketing youth. The league as a whole is starting to, because everybody got crushed by the pandemic, the league as a whole, though, is starting to work its way out of it. The Alouettes ownership situation is unfortunate, but it's nothing, I think, overly distressing.
Right.
Coming online now is Genius Sports, and this is one of the contracts they had signed while they had the hiatus. And Genius Sports, of course, one of their things is marketing, bringing more fan engagement. This is the year that we're going to start to see their involvement grow exponentially as they start to figure out how to work with the CFL, how to promote it. We should see a stronger marketing attempt from them pushing along with the CFL to get the name and the brand out there.
And because does the CFL have something similar to what the NFL has? Like NFL Play 60. So how about a CFL Play 60 I know, like you said, the Argonauts are trying to engage with the youth, but is there anything league-wise? Is the league and
unfortunately, the NFL has kind of crept into that market in Canada here as well in the youth football. There isn't a big presence. One thing that I've talked about on our podcast a little bit in the past is when I was 12, 13 years old, and I lived about 120 miles from Winnipeg. Trevor Kennard, who was the place kicker at the time, came out to my school and had a Q&A and did some, I think it was a part of a literacy program. I won a t-shirt, got my picture taken with him. At 13, I was already about 5 inches taller than Trevor Kennard. But I remember that 30 plus years later.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the league needs to do is get back to some of that marketing as well. And youth football, it's sad in a way that so many of the youth football programs across Canada have the team names that are the same as NFL teams. And there isn't a Rough Riders and a Red Blacks and a Blue Bombers in the youth football. That's, same thing growing up playing youth baseball. Everybody wanted to be the Blue Jays in Canada, but you might have been the Orioles or the Red Sox. So getting that familiarity back is one of the things that it's going to take.
Yeah.
Montreal moving to play at Molson Stadium a few years back was a big plus as far as the fan engagement in Montreal.
Yeah.
The Big O outlived its lifespan as a workable stadium, and the closeness, the intimate atmosphere at Molson Percival has been a big boon as far as the fan experience. And it's just a matter of getting more people to understand that Montreal is going to be a hockey town. I know we talk about different cities, and the Habs are the story in Montreal,
Right?
But Montreal's big enough that there should be football fans to fill that stadium.
Well, not to mention it, just talking about the Big O. Do you see the Grey Cup returning to Montreal and being played at the Big O at any time? Because I mean, obviously the state. I mean, I think I drove by it twice when I was out there. I mean, from the outside it looks still in terrific shape, but has there been any talk, any rumors, or any whispers of them going back to Montreal?
I haven't heard, and I think at this point it's not feasible without many, many millions of dollars of renovation to get it back up to that standard. I think they've looked at doing other things with the space, and it's not set up to host baseball or football at this point.
Do you think they would maybe bring it to Percival Molson?
I highly doubt it, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. The other thing they could consider is maybe playing it where the soccer team plays. You could have a special event there. But beyond that, no, I don't see it, because Percival Molson is up on a hill. The way you get to it is you take the metro to about 3 or 4 blocks away, and then you climb uphill to get to the stadium.
I've walked that hill. That's a hill. That's almost the type of hill where it's like we call them agony and misery in the Army. Going. That was a hard climb. That was a hard climb.
Once you get into the stadium, the vistas, the view of the city of Montreal is just immaculate.
Right.
And you cannot find anything else like that in the city. And the stadium itself is very quaint. You're very close to the action. It's hard to say. I know the previous ownership group, there was questions about, would you move from Molson? And they said, until it makes sense to leave, why would we leave?
Right. And in talking about the Grey Cup coming back to places it hasn't played in a while, is the Grey Cup coming back to BC?
Yes, in 2 to 3 years, I believe.
Okay. And because that's, of all the I'm sitting here thinking, it's like where is the Grey Cup not been played in a long time? So obviously Montreal, and at a BC place. And so is that for sure? Has that been locked in, or is that still in the talking stages?
2024.
Nice.
It's a for sure.
Nice. And in going along, talking about ownership and the major markets and everything, let's talk about Toronto. How is the ownership? Because down here, and this gets into a whole another subject here, we've got the XFL playing. And for those of you who have not watched the XFL yet, it's kind of what we expect. It's a little bit sloppy football, but it's football nonetheless. Very, very much a very hyped up product with very few people in the stands, and it appears to be dwindling ratings. Kind of like I posted on Twitter a little bit ago, before we hit the record button. Actually, when I was having my coffee and my breakfast, I go, we've kind of seen this movie before play out. But down here, obviously, God, how long has it been now since there was the talks between the CFL and the XFL? Was it 2 years ago now?
That would have been, we had the canceled season in 2020, and a lot of the talk was about what it looks like coming out of that.
Right.
As far as Toronto goes, they're owned by MLSE, which is Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. That also owns the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Raptors, Toronto FC soccer team. The Argos are kind of the little brother of the MLSE holdings. They're not going anywhere. It's an important partnership to have with TSN, our national sports broadcaster, being based in Toronto as well, and involved with MLSE in many facets of what they do. One of the best things two great things for Toronto is, one, Michael Pinball Clemens as president of that club is, as far as CFL goes, as one of the icons in Toronto. He was a very well respected and outstanding player throughout the 90s. And 2, they won the Grey Cup last year.
Right.
That reinvigorated some interest in the team, got fans in Toronto, and it's a massive city. It's one of the largest in North America. So for people to actually go, oh yeah, we have a CFL team and they're good again, it was a great spark. So I don't think it's too big of an issue, and hopefully that success of last year's Grey Cup is going to turn into more eyes on the team this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know with Pinball Clemens, I mean, you couldn't have picked a better, I mean, if John Candy were still alive, obviously he would be, whether or not he was part owner or even affiliated with the team, he'd still be the face of the franchise, at least for Americans down here. Now with Chad Kelly playing, obviously his uncle was, Jim Kelly with the Buffalo Bills. With the NFL, has there been any, I don't foresee the NFL trying to expand to Toronto, and I don't think there's any talk going on. But when it came to the XFL, the rumors of the Argos jumping ship to the XFL, what was that based on? Do you guys know? I mean, other than maybe somebody said something to somebody third hand. I mean, I still don't. Prior to us coming on, I was just doing research and everything and looking around, and there's still, if you run the search engines, there's still out there XFL Argos to the XFL talk, or at least there was. What do you know what that was based on?
I've never had it substantiated. I've never heard anyone from MLSC come out and categorically state it that they were interested. I think it was because of the whole business of the XFL and the CFL entering into a, talking about talking, as Randy Ambrosi put it. The whole idea was, okay, if they're going to do that, maybe they want to grab the major markets.
Right.
So that would be Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. Beyond that, I've never heard any modicum of interest from MLSC that was something they really wanted to do. Their big thing is they want to evaluate their franchises. This is their business.
Yeah.
And the Argonauts right now need to grow as a franchise. So shoving them to the XFL was maybe a thought, but more than likely they're looking to the CFL and saying, okay, if we're going to be here, how do we make this work?
Right. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Heath.
And one of the other things that I think led to some of this fuel was when the two organizations started talking XFL, CFL, we weren't getting a lot of transparency, but they were saying nothing is off the table at this point.
Right.
So when you leave it that open-ended, rumors are going to fly. And somebody took a nugget of that and said, what if this happens? And somebody else ran with it.
Right. And I'm thinking about it. It's kind of like back in when I was doing, I was in the military I was an intelligence officer. We'd have that happen all the time. Somebody would get a little nugget of truth or rumor. And then next thing you know, I'm briefing it as, somebody's, I'm like, yeah, but we don't know. Just pure speculation. But the one thing that we don't have to speculate on is the numbers. And the numbers not only have asses in the seats, which, let's face it, for Toronto gets frustrating when you watch it, football in a half-empty stadium in a major, size of Chicago. It gets frustrating as a CFL fan. But with that said, CFL ratings with TSN have remained pretty much consistent. I mean, those have not fallen. Am I correct?
The Grey Cup did great on television.
Yeah.
The numbers were there. I think, especially in the fourth quarter, as the game became chaotic, more eyes were glued to the television to see what was going to unfold.
Right.
And you weren't disappointed because everything that could have happened did. The bigger thing is you got to remember this, that TSN and Rogers basically own MLSE.
Mm-hmm.
And TSN is heavily invested in the Canadian Football League. They have to have Toronto. They want Montreal. They want Vancouver because they've got advertisers that are looking to hit those markets, and they want to be able to deliver.
Right.
That's why the Alouettes will get their ownership situation sorted. They will be under a new group coming up probably by season start. I would think anytime, as Farhan Lalji put it, anytime it goes quiet in the discussions about ownership means something is close.
Right.
The for TSN, that's part of what they need, and they can do well with it. The Argos attendance has been coming back. This is a sort of an untold story, but granted, a couple of years ago, it was atrocious, but it is moving back. And in fact, in the East Final this year, they had over 21,000 people screaming for that football game. And that stadium, that's a huge number. And I can't imagine how loud it was in there, because the way that stadium's constructed, the noise just comes down from the roof and drops on top of you.
Yeah.
It would be unbelievable to try to play in that.
So it's everything. The way it sounds to me, and talking with both you guys, everything's kind of tracking back up. The numbers we're out of that pandemic downturn, and we're kind of tracking up really across the league. So with all that said, and do you see, because I thought I read something where Randy Ambrosi was talking about TV down here, exposure down, not, I want to say down here, I live in Japan now, but down in the States, what is the latest with, are they still going to be, is the CFL still going to be on ESPN Plus? Okay. Well, it's Don's nodding yes. So
one of the things to watch for with this partnership with Genius Sports, and I don't know if we touched fully on it, is not only is Genius Sports hired by the CFL, they've formed a joint partnership. The CFL Ventures is partially a product of Genius Sports. And one of the things they're looking at doing is how to grow fan engagement. You mentioned Western Illinois, Jalen Acklin. If your online presence indicates that you're an alum of Western Illinois University, Genius Sports is looking at, how do I communicate to you when Jalen Acklin and the Ottawa Red Blacks are playing and where?
Right.
That's a key to getting more Americans engaged in the CFL. A lot of these players, if you're a fan or an alum of a university, you remember watching them. Zach Collaros was a star at Cincinnati. How many people in that market know where he is now? But if they can reach out to people in Cincinnati and say, hey, Zach Collaros is a 2-time reigning MOP of the CFL. This game is going to be on Friday night on ESPN Plus. Check it out.
Yeah.
That's where we're trending.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of the same over in Japan. I do the Gridiron Japan podcast, and one of our friends of the show is Aaron Ellis, who played college football at University of St. Francis in Joliet. Really about I lived like right next to campus way back when. But anytime he plays internationally, whether it be over here for the Dentsu Caterpillars or over in Europe where he's at right now, there's always something kind of kicked out. There's a bit of fan engagement, even with the teams that he plays for, just to kind of get it out there. So hopefully they do. And that's kind of brings up another part of that too. Do you see, listen, there's a lot of fan created stuff out there on YouTube. We've all seen it. But is the CFL going to ever create a CFL Films subsidiary and try to market it, the CFL, the way the NFL markets the league? And even now with the way the XFL is doing, trying to putting compelling story, because football in essence is all about story too. Do you see that happening in the near future?
My gut feeling is no. And wasn't NFL Film started independently and then sort of got absorbed by the NFL?
Yeah, it was way back when, because Ed Sable was thinking outside the box. And I mean, that was back. I mean, he kind of foresaw the future. And if it weren't for NFL Films, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I mean, I shipped over one of the things that I had 2 ways of shipping stuff, by sea and by air. All my NFL Film stuff went by air because I didn't trust it. I did not want it to fall into the ocean. So, but for instance, you've got a guy on YouTube, CFL Fan 31. Anybody who's listening to this is you've probably watched some of his stuff. He puts out great stuff, a lot of fan stuff. But to me, I always get frustrated when I don't see it come from the league. But there's been good stuff put out by TSN, by other video makers over the years. So I'm sorry, I'm
CFL is getting there though. Marshall Ferguson did a lot of hits prior to free agency. He's going to do a lot more for the league prior to the draft. The CFL is, as I said, they're slowly working their way toward this. The league is just, I think it's because it's such a small league. They're not risk takers in the same way that maybe the NFL is.
Right.
And they're constantly trying to make sure they know what they have before they step out and do something different. Now, this is where Genius Sports is really off the map because, as Heath mentioned, CFL Ventures, that's a joint product of the two sides working together. And Genius Sports is invested to not only work with the CFL, but to make money off the CFL.
Yeah.
I think as far as youth engagement, they're looking at new ways. One of the positives, I guess, if you can say there's anything positive to coming out of a canceled 2020 season, was the league had to look at what the future is going to be, and they've engaged massive TikTok stars. Now I can't name them. I'm in my 40s, and I'm not going to be able to name them, but I know that we're at a game.
Listen, we're all of an age where we shouldn't be having TikTok on our phones. Period. Just that's a younger person's game when it comes to some of that stuff. So I apologize.
That's okay. We were at a game at Mosaic in Regina, and there was a TikTok star doing some sort of promo video that they showed on the stadium, and it was actually going out to all of his TikTok followers as well, and it was in the millions of followers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that was paid content. The CFL reached out to this person and said, "Hey, can you do this?" But anything like that is going to help.
Right.
You look at TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. How do we engage the youth? And I know friends that have kids that don't even ever watch TV. They just spend all their time on YouTube, and there's YouTube stars with millions and millions of followers.
Yeah.
If you can find the right ones that are going to talk about CFL football,
right,
that's going to draw some eyeballs too.
Yeah. And it's and again, I'm of an age and I'm 55, so I guess maybe that I'm that old guy now shaking his fist, yelling at it's like, why can't why? But again, goes back to what you said: YouTube, TikTok, everything. That is the wave of the future. So talking about the future, let's talk expansion. We've got the 10th team hanging out there that's been out there dangling in front of our eyes for, how many decades is it going on now?
It was in the 80s for
1984.
sure.
Okay. All right.
So coming up 40 years.
Do you see any movement on it coming up in the next couple of years?
Again, the pandemic really sidetracked all of that momentum. Right. I would think that the league is still highly motivated to get that 10th team. It makes scheduling so much simpler. The most likely scenario that I can see is they're going to have somebody step up and say, look, we're going to put up a stadium or modify one of the existing stadiums that we have on the East Coast, and the Atlantic Schooners could come into being. In the next 5 years, maybe. The next 10 years, more likely.
Right. And obviously building a stadium is no small expense. And I would think out in that neck of the woods in the Maritimes, people aren't keen on using public money to build a stadium for a sports team.
Unless you can tie it to something else, no. And that would be federal money for, say, a Commonwealth Games or something. And then you could certainly parlay that into a stadium. They're talking about BC did this in 2010 when there was massive renovations of BC Place. They built a temporary stadium.
Yeah.
And that worked fantastically. The people really enjoyed the experience. The attendance was huge.
Yeah.
This is something that they're talking about with Halifax and Moncton. What about using one of the college stadiums but putting up temporary stands, increasing the numbers?
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching, I think that was kind of when the CFL was starting to be shown on American TV. during that time period, yeah, you'd see huge crowds at BC at the temporary stadium. And when you go back and then you look at those crowds and then look at, Empire Stadium, all the old history, it's like, oh yeah. I mean, for me as a history guy, as a football history guy, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So yeah, to be able to do that, I mean, because there is a demand for it. With that,
on
yeah.
YouTube, Calgary Stampeder Classics is a great one to follow because
Yeah.
he does a lot of vintage football games, complete
Mhm.
games that you can watch from start to finish. I love watching games from the 1960s, Alouettes and Rough Riders or Argonauts and Tiger Cats, and just the way the game was described, the way the television coverage was. It was far simpler. Replays were live action, not slowed down. It was just a different time as the
Yeah.
technology was starting to burgeon. The league was out there. They went for it. Unfortunately, most of the copies of the games from back then, even though the games were shown in color, they didn't copy them in color.
Right.
So they're typically coming out in black and white. But
you get that feel.
Fun to watch.
You get the feel of what it was like. You sit there, like when I'll pull up an old Monday Night Football game from the 70s with Howard Cosell, I'm just sitting there. I'm 12 years old again. It's like, oh, this is nice. This is nice. And there are a lot of there are a lot of younger people out there who do appreciate the history. So just to me, and it's like I just wish the CFL would push that history out more because it's such a great league. It's such a great history. I mean, listen, of all the leagues that I follow, the CFL is my number one league. Always has been. That's right. The reason why I created my CFL America account on Twitter, because I love the CFL. I mean, there's just so much. And it's also a league too where you guys were at when you guys go to Grey Cup, you guys meet people from all over. It's a communal event. Everybody who I've talked to, I have unfortunately not been to a Grey Cup, but I mean, how many times have I heard from you, Don? Hey, come on up to the Grey Cup this year. Yeah, come on up to the Grey Cup. It's not like in America where you can't afford a ticket. I mean, tickets can be had to the Grey Cup if you want to go, and you don't have to sell your house to to attend a game. So, one final thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, and that is about how to watch the CFL. I know before we hit the record button, I was gonna save this. I was telling you I was kind of loading this round into the chamber. Okay, so the CFL is on TSN up there, and obviously it's not available over the air. You've got to have a cable or satellite subscription package to watch CFL, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so like for instance, when Saskatchewan is, so you're not getting Saskatchewan. You've got to have, because in the United States, for instance, when the Bears are on Monday Night Football, but they're on ESPN, the rule is that the game will be available free over the air. So when the Bears are on Monday Night Football, sometimes they're on WGN in Chicago, other times WLS. You guys don't have that. It's every game is a national game.
Yes. Correct. And one of the nice things with the CFL is we don't have overlapping games. The schedule, because there's only at max 4 games a week, we can roll them out individually. So it's not like an NFL Sunday where you're trying to decide if you're watching that Vikings-Packers game or if you're watching that Cowboys-Eagles game, which one has the most draw to you.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch each game.
Right.
The downside to having that exclusive partnership with TSN is, as you said, there are no over-the-air games. It's all part of a package. TSN is also owned by Bell Media, which owns CTV, which is a national broadcaster and over-the-air broadcaster. Those of us that are CFL diehards are basically pleading to get them back on the airwaves on CTV as well, as a way to draw more people to it.
Well, and they wouldn't lose people. I mean, that's kind of the thing. I'm like, okay, well, they're not going to lose viewers. They're only going to gain viewers. And again, this is something, I mean, I'm all of a sudden like, okay, what's the business decision here? I mean, NFL games are NFL games available free on CTV over the air?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, including playoff games. And we also, most of our cable packages include a lot of the American networks as well. So there's no
Right.
shortage of ability to watch NFL football in Canada.
Well, that's when we were in Canada, some of the hotels had American TV, and I told my wife, no, turn CTV on or CBC on because I got to get away from the noise. So I apologize for my countrymen bombarding you guys with all kinds of our media and probably a lot of our news crap too. So
Well, you can subscribe over the internet with TSN. I think they're working on TSN Plus or TSN Go
Okay.
Plus, which is another way to digest it. You've always been able to watch TSN on your mobile phone.
right,
The hard part about Canada is that A, it's huge, and B, there's so few of us.
right,
And with only 2 or 3 competing networks, how do you work out a deal where maybe multiples buy into an 81 game schedule? It's pretty tough. So when CBC was there, originally it was CBC and CTV, then it was CBC and TSN, and now TSN has had exclusive rights for almost 20 years. TSN does a fantastic job. They promote the league, but it would be nice to get another perspective, and it's just hard to know if a CBC would be interested in coming back in. I don't know if the CFL would want to step on the toes of TSN and say we'd like to open this up again.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to even what you said earlier. I mean, Toronto is owned by MLSE, so there's a connection with all these entities and companies and media people. And then so I'm in Japan, so the CFL internationally, they do have a package. At least they usually do every year. It seems like it's always agreed to like minutes before kickoff of the first game of the CFL season. In terms of the international presence with the CFL on the internet, so it goes back to I was telling you guys before we started recording. Grey Cup game. I bought the Grey Cup game for I think it was like $5 or something to be able to watch on the international provider. And then I have it on, and it was skipping constantly. It was such poor streaming quality. And my service provider, it's actually, it's a Japanese service provider, SoftBank, high speed data. So I'm like, okay. And I try, I'm like, it's still the same thing. Do you foresee, has there been any rumblings about how the CFL is going to market itself outside of North America, or because that service provider also covers U Sports, which is another hidden gem that people don't get to see really even in Canada.
CFL 2.0 was part of the push to change all of this so that they could get a bigger international presence, not only to recruit international talent, but also to broaden the horizons, as it were, and get the game to more people. The thing that baseball did, I thought, was quite inventive, and I would like to maybe see if CFL and TSN could work out a deal where baseball, you can watch games just on regular YouTube.
Right.
And why not have that? Or Apple TV or something else? Like, have it on another platform, Prime, that you could use to get your audience to grow.
Right. And now everything is streaming. I mean, over the air TV is great, and I have it here, but I'm in Japan. That's a whole nother story. I mean, it's all governed. There's 9 channels, and that's about it. But in the States, people are cutting the cord and over the air. But when it comes down to it, we're all pretty much watching our sports and everything. Usually now it's growing streaming. Yeah, why can't the CFL cut a deal, say with Pluto TV? That's a good example, because Pluto TV, I just read an article on them about how they're growing. They're part of CBS and everything, but it's available free. And to add that as a sports, just to have, Yeah, no, I guess I'm just scratching my head, and I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall when it comes to when it comes to reading about the CFL and media and getting the word out and being available to watch for people.
The CFL's always been a little bit slow on the uptake on these types of things. The strength of the league is often hanging by a thread. We talked about it as a small league in a sparsely populated country. It's this fear of disaster if they try something new and it fails. That might be still a little bit of a sting of the US expansion of the 90s and how that worked and maybe set people back and afraid to try something new. But I watched some MLB games on Apple TV last year to see what that broadcast was like, and it was fantastic. They had some new camera angles. They tried some different things.
Okay.
And, the more that the CFL can look at those options, the better. And there's so many different streaming options out there now.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to have a difficulty finding it if you put the content out.
Right.
I know the NFL did some stuff exclusively on Prime this past year as well.
Yeah.
Right. It's there. You've just got to be willing to take the risk and figure out how to do it.
Right. It goes back to what you're saying about baseball. I know just this morning I was looking at a promo. The World Baseball Classic starts next month, and that's a huge thing here in Japan. But in Japan, all the Japanese games are going to be on Amazon Prime, apparently. So good thing I bought that Prime membership here, because without it, it'd be hard getting computer parts for me too. So, but
this is the thing I was going about YouTube though.
Yeah.
Baseball is, I think, about maybe once a month, maybe twice a month, putting games on YouTube, just regular YouTube. You don't have to have a YouTube TV, just regular YouTube. And why not the CFL? Why not have the TSN broadcast punched out into YouTube and let people consume it that way?
Yeah.
I know that maybe TSN doesn't get revenue in terms of subscribers, but is there a way that they could figure that out, that YouTube could pay them a little bit for it?
And with that said, that is a small, that's one of those like long-term investments too. By getting the exposure out now, this investment is not going to pay off like next year, but say in 20 years from now, when you've got this whole group of fans that are demanding, when we're in our 70s and our 60s, you've got this whole new group in that's going to keep that league. That, again, it's all about building that fan base, and there's also the issue too of, we have no CFL video game, but you guys have seen me harp on Twitter about that. But with that said, we're all the same age. We fondly remember Tecmo Bowl. There is a Tecmo Bowl version of the CFL available for free at tecmobowl.org. Shameless plug. Make no money off of this for it, but it's just a great site. And, I can go relive my my dorm days in college at Western Illinois. So, well, gentlemen, let's wrap it up here. Where can everybody find the Third Down Gamble podcast? And before you guys do that, let me just say about the Third Down Gamble podcast. When I first found you guys, and this has been several years ago, it was just one of those where I just stumbled on it. I'm like, huh. Been a fan ever since. I try to listen as much as I can. I've kind of fallen off, obviously, with the move and everything. Trying to listen to more CFL podcasts. But when I found you guys were like a breath of fresh air. Listening to you guys talk, and just the way you guys approach the game, the perspectives you bring in, it's very I kept coming back to it because, again, you guys bring a very fresh perspective. You guys are fans. You guys go to the games. You love the CFL, and it comes through on every episode. And you guys, even more importantly, are students of not only the students of the game, but students of history. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the hours upon hours I've enjoyed listening to you guys.
Well, thank you very much. That's very appreciated by us. Yeah. Pat Mooney, who's our other host, Heath Graham, and myself, Don Charbon, it's been 4 years now of doing this. It's been a blast. I'm surprised that it's gone as easily in a sense that it has, but we've developed a good following, and we're happy to keep going. We're weekly, even in the off season. Sometimes we'll be coming up with special guests. JC Abbott of 3 Down Nation was on last week. Mike Hogan, the voice of the Toronto Argonauts radio broadcast, is going to be out next week.
Mike's a great guy.
He's fantastic. And we've talked to all kinds of different people, states, Canada. It doesn't really matter. So long as you're talking football, we're good with it.
Yeah. And I know you guys had me on your show, so I do appreciate it. Yeah, that's been a long. It seems like that's been forever ago. Of course, that was a whole nother continent away from me now at this point. And where can everybody find you guys on the web and on social media?
The podcast is at Third Down Gamble. Myself, I'm at Don Charbon, but I'm not much of a follow. Heath is probably more exciting.
So we are 171 episodes into the podcast now. Hosted by Podbean, but available on Apple Podcasts and most other podcast networks. And I am at the Lethal 13, but lethal spelled incorrectly, LEATHAL 13 on Twitter.
Okay,
and that's the only place you want to follow me. I have an Instagram, but I think I've posted 2 things in over several years. So
well, I host the Gridiron Japan podcast, or co-host the Gridiron Japan podcast, and we have an Instagram page, and I think we got 2 pictures on there. I guess maybe it's just like, I don't know what to post. It's Instagram. But on Twitter, that's the great thing about Twitter. It just gets the word out, and hopefully Twitter is going to be around for a long time, but who knows? We could watch the news tomorrow, and we'll all be locked out of our Twitter accounts the way Elon Musk is going with it. So, all right. Well, listen, hey, everybody, thank you very much for listening, and we will, and this, again, it's Greg James. I'm at CFL America on Twitter, and you can also I've started redid an old Twitter account, but for Gridiron America, it's Gridiron America at America Gridiron on Twitter. With that said, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me, and for everybody else listening, we will be talking to you very soon. Bye-bye.
We'll kick off for victory. Cheer them on to the Grey Cup march. Lusty men of energy down the field on the Grey Cup march. They'll kick off for victory as we cheer to the Grey Cup march. Leading grid teams you will see down the field on the Grey Cup march. Onward, men, you're here to play the greatest game of all. We will back you all the way. Go and win that ball. Snap that ball for victory as we cheer to the Grey Cup march. Teamwork with the joie de vivre, all the true football fans.